In 2014, a company valued at over $3 billion, backed by the absolute smartest money in Silicon Valley, built a flagship fitness tracker.
Right.
But during their testing phase, they made a decision that frankly defies all mechanical engineering logic. They forgot to test if the device could survive human sweat.
Which is just staggering to think about.
Exactly. And 3 years later, that $3 billion valuation was completely erased from existence, and the company was liquidated for scraps.
Yeah.
So welcome to a special peak-to-dust forensic examination on this deep dive.
It really is a profound collapse. And, to understand it, we cannot just look at a balance sheet and point to where the money ran out.
No, not at all.
Because the documentation left in Jawbone's wake paints a highly complex picture of a company that flew incredibly close to the sun, and they were blinded by their own early successes.
Yeah. Our mission today is to dissect that spectacular rise and devastating collapse for you, the listener. We're looking at how Jawbone, a consumer electronics titan that raised roughly $930 million and hit a $3.2 billion valuation, how they entirely evaporated.
We are bypassing any casual banter today.
Yes, strictly business. This is a serious, investigative look into how unchecked ambition, unforgiving hardware physics, and really toxic market dynamics destroyed a unicorn.
And we've synthesized a massive stack of sources to build this timeline for you. We're looking at direct interviews with Jawbone founder Hossein Rahman, complex financial filings.
Well, court documents, too.
Right, bitter court documents from the International Trade Commission, plus investigative reports from tech journalists and postmortem analyses from top-tier venture capital firms like Sequoia.
Which brings us to the core question we are going to answer for you today. How does a company that seemingly invented the modern Bluetooth headset, the portable wireless speaker, and early fitness tracking lose absolutely everything to its competitors and end up in a fire sale? To answer that, we have to look at the foundational DNA that made them think they were invincible. We have to go back to 1999 and look at their origin as military-grade innovators.
So the company was originally founded as a LIFCOM by two Stanford graduates, Hossein Rahman, who held a degree in mechanical engineering, and Alexander Esseli.
But their initial vision wasn't hardware, was it?
No, not at all. They were trying to build a voice interaction layer for mobile phones. They were inspired by the early PDA interfaces like Palm and Nokia, and they wanted to create a system where you could just talk to your device.
I mean, they were basically trying to build a voice assistant a full decade before that technology was viable.
Exactly. But the moment they started writing the software, they ran into a wall of physics. Mobile phones at the time were rudimentary, and ambient noise made voice recognition impossible.
All right, if a user was walking down a city street, a single microphone couldn't distinguish human vocal frequencies from, say, a passing bus or wind shear.
Yes. The software overlay was entirely useless without a clean audio feed, which, forced a radical pivot.
They had to change everything.
Rather than abandoning the concept, Rahman and Esseli dug into the acoustic physics of background noise. They realized they needed a system that didn't just filter noise via software algorithms.
They had to cancel it at the hardware level.
Right, actively cancel it before it even reached the processor. So they developed a dual microphone system where one mic captures the ambient environment and the other captures the voice.
Utilizing phase inversion.
Exactly. Essentially creating a sound wave that is the exact negative of the background noise. Through that, they could achieve destructive interference, effectively deleting the ambient sound.
That is a staggering pivot. It's like a team setting out to build a fully autonomous self-driving car, only to realize the software is useless because the sensors are blinded by rain.
That's a great analogy.
Right. So they stop building the car and end up patenting a revolutionary new radar system instead. They shifted their entire operational model from a software overlay to fundamental audio hardware.
And Rahman himself hailed this as the biggest breakthrough in mobile audio in 30 years. They were running these physical A/B tests with weed whackers, blenders, industrial fans roaring in the background, proving their technology could strip all that noise away.
But the market response was brutal.
It was. When they pitched this to the major phone manufacturers, Nokia, Motorola, Ericsson, the answer was a universal rejection.
Wait, if the technology worked perfectly, why would hardware manufacturers reject it in 1999? Were the processing requirements too high for those early phones?
Well, the processing was an issue, but the primary barrier was simply the physical cost of the bill of materials.
Oh, the hardware itself.
Right. The system required adding a second microphone to the handset, Phone margins were razor thin back then, and manufacturers were fighting over fractions of a penny per unit.
Wow.
The idea of adding the cost of an entirely new physical component plus the acoustic housing was deemed financially impossible by the telecom giants.
And that initial rejection plunged the company into what Rahman later called a nuclear winter. They couldn't get traction, and they couldn't get funding.
It was incredibly bleak. By 2004, they managed to secure a meeting with Steve Jobs to pitch a wired headset that connected to a cell phone with a clip.
Oh, I read about this.
Yeah, Jobs notoriously savaged the physical design. He stated, "The only place anyone would ever use a clip like that is in your mind."
Ouch.
Yeah, the product completely flopped, and the fallout from that failure was nearly fatal. The company dwindled down to just 4 employees.
They were running on fumes, right? Something like $60,000 in cash against $600,000 in debt.
Exactly. Mayfield Fund, one of their early investors, went so far as to physically put chains on the office doors and change the locks.
That is intense. But the technology itself, the phase inversion and destructive interference, was still valid, which is what led to their lifeline, right? A 2002 contract with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Yes. The U.S. military had a highly specific use case that perfectly matched Alifcom's technology. They needed high reliability, low detectability speech transmission for soldiers operating in extremely high noise combat environments.
Like active firefights.
Right, or inside armored vehicles. The military didn't care about the added cost of a second microphone. They cared about acoustic clarity.
And that government contract provided the crucial capital and field validation they needed to survive. They refined their military-grade noise suppression, eventually trademarking it with the highly aggressive martial name Noise Assassin.
Noise Assassin, yeah.
And that underlying technology paved the way for their massive commercial breakthrough in 2006.
Right, because by 2006, Bluetooth protocols had matured enough to support high-quality audio transmission without draining a phone's battery in an hour.
Which was a huge leap.
Jawbone took their Noise Assassin technology, dropped the wired clip that Steve Jobs hated, and launched a wireless Bluetooth headset. But the critical variable here wasn't just the acoustic engineering.
It was the design.
Exactly. It was their partnership with Ives Behar, the founder of the design agency Fuse Project, who joined as their chief creative officer.
And Behar completely inverted the product category. Prior to 2006, Bluetooth headsets were universally ugly.
They really were.
They were utilitarian, bulky plastic modules that made users look like telemarketers or stockbrokers. Behar treated the headset like an architectural challenge.
Yes, he utilized perforated metal, subtle relief textures, asymmetric geometric patterns. He fundamentally altered the psychology of the device.
He turned an acoustic utility into a premium fashion accessory.
When it launched at AT&T stores, it sold out immediately because it tapped into an unarticulated consumer desire for technology that didn't look like technology. The industrial design was so striking, it was subsequently displayed in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art.
So they owned the premium Bluetooth headset market entirely through 2007-2008, bringing in massive profits. But that early dominance masked a creeping existential threat. By 2010, the standalone headset market was actively shrinking.
Right, because car manufacturers were rapidly integrating Bluetooth directly into vehicle dashboards.
And hands-free driving laws meant consumers no longer needed a headset if their car handled the audio routing natively.
Exactly. The shrinking total addressable market created an immediate crisis inside Jawbone, primarily driven by their venture capital structure.
This is a crucial point for you to understand if you want to know how Silicon Valley works.
Jawbone was raising hundreds of millions of dollars at staggering valuations. In the venture capital model, you cannot operate a highly profitable niche company in a shrinking sector.
Right. To justify the returns those investors demand, you need a massive, endlessly expanding market.
Which explains the launch of the Jambox in 2010. Jawbone took their core competencies, Bluetooth routing, acoustic engineering, and Ives Behar's design philosophy, and effectively created the portable wireless speaker category.
The Jambox featured textured wraparound grills and bold colors. It became the #1 selling portable speaker in the U.S.
It was a massive commercial success. But even nominating portable audio wasn't enough to sustain the multi-billion-dollar valuations the venture capitalists were projecting.
The board needed a narrative of infinite scale.
Yes, they needed a product that users interacted with 24 hours a day, generating recurring data. That immense financial pressure drove their fateful pivot into the quantified-self movement.
So in November 2011, they launched the UP band for $99.99. I have to push back hard on the fundamental logic of this expansion.
Go ahead.
Jawbone was an audio company. Their entire institutional DNA was built around acoustic physics, phase inversion, and speaker drivers. Why did they assume they could suddenly master human biometrics, skin contact sensors, and the relentless physical wear and tear of 247 fitness tracking?
It's a great question.
It seems like a massive leap in engineering scope.
It was an egregious overreach, driven entirely by the need to capture a limitless market upside. Health and wellness represented a vast, untapped data ecosystem. But, as you rightly point out, moving from rigid audio hardware sitting on a desk to flexible biometric materials science requires a completely different engineering paradigm.
Right. An audio speaker doesn't take a shower.
Exactly. It doesn't get flexed thousands of times a day. It doesn't get exposed to the chemical complexities of human sweat.
And that lack of institutional knowledge in material science triggered their first catastrophic hardware failure. Almost immediately after the UP band launched in late 2011, the devices started bricking, refusing to hold a charge, freezing, or completely short-circuiting.
The investigative reports detail the exact cause, and it is a staggering oversight.
Tell them about the water testing.
When Jawbone engineers conducted their water resistance testing, they evaluated the internal seals using pure H2O.
Pure H2O.
Yes, which is a fundamental failure in physical testing protocols for a wearable. Pure water is actually an electrical insulator. It doesn't conduct electricity well.
But the UP band wasn't going into a sterile laboratory vacuum. It was going onto a human wrist.
Right. The moment a user put it on and went for a run, the device was exposed to sweat, which is highly saline.
Salty human sweat is incredibly conductive. Users were also exposing the band to skin oils, acidic soaps, chemical lotions. These variables fundamentally altered the viscosity and chemical composition of the fluids attacking the device.
The saline fluids were breaking down the chemical adhesives of the seals. The sweat was penetrating the device at a microscopic level, creating galvanic corrosion on the internal circuitry.
Essentially bathing the internal capacitors in liquid electricity.
Exactly. The hardware shorted out en masse. Hussein Rahman was dealing with furious customers demanding answers as failure rates skyrocketed.
So in December 2011, Rahman executed a highly dramatic public relations maneuver. He issued an open letter offering full refunds to anyone who purchased an UP band. And crucially, he didn't require users to physically mail the broken devices back.
At the time, tech media lauded this as a masterclass in corporate integrity and crisis management. The narrative was that Jawbone was taking ultimate responsibility for their product.
But let's look at the actual operational mechanics of that decision. Yes, it was a PR win, but the financial and cultural damage internally was profound.
It really was.
First, it cost the company tens of millions of dollars in direct refunds and completely stalled their market momentum for a year while they scrambled to retool the physical seals. But more importantly, did this establish a toxic internal precedent? Did the engineering teams learn that they could rush underdeveloped hardware out the door because the executive team would just issue a massive refund to smooth over the fallout?
That is precisely the cultural rot it established. It ingrained a dangerous belief that marketing and PR could outrun physics.
Wow.
Hardware requires methodical, rigorous, grueling iteration. Jawbone learned the wrong lesson. They learned they could buy their way out of an engineering failure.
But despite this massive blunder, the venture capital community remained entirely enamored with the Jawbone narrative. The illusion of invincibility held. They retooled and re-released the UP band in late 2012, and the funding kept pouring in.
By 2012, they had raised over $200 million. They aggressively deployed that capital to artificially acquire the technical depth they lacked internally.
Right. In 2013, they purchased a company called Body Media for $100 million.
Body Media held a highly valuable portfolio of 80 patents focused on multi-sensor technology, specifically the integration of accelerometers with physiological monitors like skin temperature and heat flux sensors.
So Jawbone was buying the scientific credibility they needed to differentiate themselves from competitors who were just using basic accelerometers to count steps, and the market rewarded this narrative.
Immensely.
By 2014, Jawbone achieved a peak valuation of $3.2 billion. They were backed by the absolute titans of Sand Hill Road Sequoia Capital, Andreessen Horowitz, Khosla Ventures, and Kleiner Perkins.
They even placed Marissa Mayer, who was then the CEO of Yahoo, on their board of directors. They were the quintessential Silicon Valley unicorn, projecting total dominance.
But that $3.2 billion valuation wasn't a safety net. It was a ticking clock.
Exactly. To justify a valuation that high to their investors, they couldn't just release a competent product. They had to release a revolutionary, flawless device that cornered the biometric data market immediately.
And that immense, crushing financial pressure directly caused the engineering negligence that destroyed their flagship product. The aggressive timelines demanded by the board clash violently with the realities of material science.
The UP3 tracker, announced in late 2014, was supposed to be their crowning achievement. It promised advanced heart rate monitoring and full deep-water waterproofing.
But it was immediately hit with massive manufacturing delays, slipping 11 weeks and entirely missing the crucial 2014 holiday shopping season.
Yes.
When it finally shipped in May 2015, the mechanical failures were shocking.
The internal engineering teams simply could not conquer the physics of the design they had promised. The full waterproofing, which was internally codenamed Thorpe after the Olympic swimmer Ian Thorpe.
That's ironic.
Very. It failed constantly on the manufacturing line. They couldn't get the microscopic tolerances on the casing seals tight enough to withstand sustained water pressure without compromising the external aesthetic design.
So after months of delays, Raman was forced to downgrade the marketing from waterproof to merely splash-resistant.
And the waterproofing was just the start of the hardware nightmare. The physical clasp mechanism, the primary way the user secures the device, was catastrophically flawed.
The latch design relied on a friction fit that degraded almost immediately under the stress of daily wear. Reviewers were reporting that the band would simply fall off their wrists 10 times a week.
Often while they were just lying in bed sleeping.
Beyond the mechanical clasp, the biometric sensors themselves became a liability. Jawbone had opted to use bioimpedance sensors to track heart rate.
Right. Unlike optical sensors, which shine a light through the skin to measure blood flow, bioimpedance relies on tiny metal nodes pressing directly against the skin to measure the body's resistance to microcurrents of electricity.
And because those nodes required constant, uninterrupted physical contact with the skin to measure that resistance, they had to be pressed down firmly. Users reported that the metal nodes were incredibly painful, leaving deep physical indentations and red marks on their wrists.
A wearable device that inflicts physical pain is a fundamental failure of user experience.
Absolutely.
Furthermore, for a company staking its $3.2 billion valuation on clinical-grade data collection, the output of those painful sensors was alarmingly poor.
Right. The independent clinical sleep studies proved that the UP3's sleep data was wildly inaccurate because the device struggled to differentiate between a user lying perfectly still while awake and actual deep REM sleep patterns.
The biometric graphs bore almost no resemblance to clinical reality.
Let's look at the internal corporate culture that allowed a device this flawed to reach the market, because the investigative reports and Glassdoor reviews paint a picture of a company operating in pure chaos.
Total chaos.
Raman was reportedly constantly on the road, heavily focused on securing the next round of venture funding, and frequently absent from the grueling day-to-day engineering decisions required to fix the clasp and the seals.
The disconnect between the executive suite's vision and the factory floor's reality was immense. Jawbone was attempting an impossible strategic maneuver.
Yes.
Think of it like pouring concrete.
Yeah.
In software development, which is the paradigm most venture capitalists operate within, you can edit the blueprint while the house is being built. You push an update over the air. You patch a bug remotely.
But hardware is like pouring concrete. No. Once the injection molding steel is cut, the design is fixed. A microscopic error in a physical clasp costs millions of dollars to rip out and recast. Jawbone's leadership treated hardware as if it were malleable software, continuously prioritizing aesthetic, investor-pleasing launch dates over the grueling necessity of physical prototyping and quality assurance.
And that strategic mismanagement was compounded by their lack of focus. Jawbone was simultaneously trying to innovate and lead in premium Bluetooth headsets, high-end wireless speakers, and biometric fitness wearables,
Which are three distinct product categories.
requiring entirely different acoustic engineers, material scientists, supply chains, manufacturing partners, and go-to-market strategies.
They were fighting a three-front war with a peacetime army, precisely at the moment when two apex predators entered the market with laser focus and vast resources.
Yes, the year is 2015, and the competitive crush on the wrist wearable market becomes absolute.
The market realities of 2015 eliminated whatever breathing room Jawbone had left. In April 2015, Apple launched the Apple Watch.
And it completely redefined the category. It wasn't just a step counter. It was a general-purpose wrist computer utilizing advanced photoplethysmography optical sensors for heart rate monitoring.
Bypassing the painful bioimpedance nodes Jawbone used.
Exactly. Apple sold 11.6 million units in its first year, leveraging the most powerful supply chain on Earth.
The Apple Watch immediately locked high-end users into the iOS ecosystem. If a consumer was willing to spend hundreds of dollars, why buy a rubber band with a broken clasp that only tracks steps when you could wear a premium, reliable smartwatch that handles your messages, calls, apps, and health data natively?
And at the lower end of the market, Fitbit executed a flawless strategy. In June 2015, Fitbit held its initial public offering at $20 a share, briefly reaching a $10 billion market capitalization.
10 billion.
Yes, Fitbit didn't try to build a general-purpose computer. They focused ruthlessly on reliable hardware and a highly sticky social software ecosystem.
Users loved the gamification of competing with their friends on the Fitbit app.
In 2015 alone, Fitbit moved 21 million units.
Squeezed between Apple's technological dominance at the high end and Fitbit's reliable social dominance at the low end, Jawbone's market share collapsed. In 2014, they held a respectable 15% of the fitness wearable market.
By the end of 2015, that plummeted to 8%.
And by 2016,
They dropped to a negligible, statistically irrelevant 2%. They were completely crushed in the consumer market.
unable to compete on retail shelves or in engineering laboratories, Jawbone shifted their fight to the one arena they felt they could control, the courtroom.
The legal warfare that erupted in 2015 was incredibly bitter. Jawbone sued Fitbit, essentially accusing them of systemic corporate espionage.
The lawsuit alleged that Fitbit recruiters had targeted and poached 30% of Jawbone's workforce.
Right. Jawbone specifically named 5 former employees, including vital user experience researchers and audio engineers, who allegedly downloaded highly confidential files onto USB thumb drives right before defecting to Fitbit.
And the specifics of the allegations were severe. Jawbone claimed these stolen files included their highly secretive Playbook for the Future, which allegedly provided an intricate multi-year roadmap detailing their supply chain margins, component costs, and future product lineup.
One Fitbit recruiter was even quoted in the legal filings as explicitly stating, Fitbit's objective is to decimate Jawbone.
Well, let me ask you for a critical analysis here. Given the catastrophic failure of the UP3 and their plummeting market share, was Jawbone genuinely victimized by targeted corporate espionage that ruined their business? Or were these lawsuits the desperate thrashings of a dying company trying to litigate its way out of a market defeat by blaming a competitor?
Well, the reality of Silicon Valley is that aggressive recruiting and the blurring of proprietary knowledge when employees jump ship is rampant. However, the legal outcomes strongly suggest that Jawbone overplayed their hand.
How so?
Jawbone aggressively pursued an import ban against Fitbit devices through the International Trade Commission, arguing patent infringement. But the ITC judge ultimately invalidated Jawbone's core patent claims.
The judge ruled that the concepts covered in the patents didn't represent a unique inventive mechanism, but rather abstract ideas applied to wearable tech. What does that actually mean in patent law? Why did their patents fail to protect them?
The ITC ruling was grounded in the precedent set by cases like Alice Corr v. CLS Bank, which established that you cannot patent an abstract idea simply by adding "do it on a computer," or in this case, "do it on a wearable device."
Okay, that makes sense.
Jawbone was trying to claim ownership over the broad concept of utilizing multi-sensor data to calculate human health metrics. The judge ruled that this is a mathematical abstraction, not a specific physical inventive mechanism. Because they failed to prove a highly specific hardware implementation was stolen, their patents were invalidated.
And the financial toll of pursuing that failed litigation was staggering. While Jawbone was burning millions of dollars on high-priced corporate attorneys, they were neglecting their core engineering.
The legal strategy backfired on multiple fronts. Fitbit, fortified by their $10 billion IPO, easily absorbed the legal costs and launched countersuits, tying Jawbone up in endless discovery.
Furthermore, the sheer financial distress of Jawbone became public knowledge when Flextronics, the massive contract manufacturer that physically assembled Jawbone's devices in their factories, sued Jawbone for $20 million in unpaid bills.
Which is devastating.
When your contract manufacturer sues you for breach of contract because you can't pay your tooling debts, it is a glaring red siren to the entire industry that your supply chain has collapsed.
You cannot build hardware if the factory refuses to turn on the machines until you clear your debts.
Exactly. The protracted legal battles drained Jawbone of the critical liquid capital they desperately needed for R&D to fix the failing UP3 hardware. They were fighting a war of attrition against competitors who had vastly more operational resources and zero manufacturing debt.
Which brings us to the financial death spiral. Unable to compete in the market, bleeding cash in the courtroom, and locked out of the factories, Jawbone's only remaining strategy was to borrow more money.
But their artificially inflated $3.2 billion valuation had transitioned from a badge of honor into a lethal trap.
In venture capital economics, we refer to this phenomenon as death by overfunding. By early 2015, their sales were plummeting, meaning they could no longer raise traditional equity financing based on growth metrics. To keep the lights on, they were forced into the debt markets.
They took a highly punitive $300 million loan from the private equity and asset management firm BlackRock.
Taking on hundreds of millions in high-interest debt is rarely a sign of strength for a tech startup that is supposed to be scaling.
To secure that BlackRock loan, Jawbone was forced to accept draconian terms that immediately drove their internal valuation below the $2 billion mark. The operational situation deteriorated so rapidly that by the end of 2015, BlackRock had marked down the value of their Jawbone holdings by a staggering 69% on their own balance sheets.
The down round was inevitable. In early 2016, Jawbone secured a $165 million investment round led by the Kuwait Investment Authority, a massive sovereign wealth fund.
This specific funding round officially slashed the company's valuation in half, down to $1.5 billion. Let's analyze the mechanics of that specific investment. Why would a sovereign wealth fund inject $165 million into a company whose flagship product is failing and whose market share has dropped to 2%?
It highlights a deep systemic flaw in the late-stage startup ecosystem. Investors, eager to deploy massive pools of capital, essentially force-feed money into companies that have lost their product-market fit.
Right.
Sovereign wealth funds have billions of dollars to deploy globally, but they often lack the granular, hands-on operational tech experience of an early-stage Silicon Valley VC firm. They see a recognizable brand name, a vast patent portfolio, and a discounted valuation, and they view it as an opportunistic asset play, ignoring the terminal rot in the core consumer business.
But that artificially bloated $1.5 billion valuation made a clean exit mathematically impossible. According to the investigative reports, Fitbit actually considered acquiring Jawbone in 2016, primarily to absorb their portfolio of over 2,000 patents and end the litigation.
But Fitbit was only willing to offer a tiny fraction of that $1.5 billion price tag.
And this is where the mechanics of venture capital liquidation preferences destroy a company.
Exactly. The investors who put money in at the $3.2 billion valuation and the Kuwait Investment Authority at the $1.5 billion valuation have clauses that guarantee they get paid back first in any sale.
So if Fitbit offers $300 million for the company, those late-stage investors take massive, unacceptable losses.
So the board refuses the offer, hoping for a miraculous turnaround that is physically impossible given their hardware failures. They were trapped by their own price tag.
No one was going to pay $1 billion for a company with failing hardware and dwindling market share just to make Jawbone's late-stage investors whole.
So the collapse became inevitable. The timeline of the end is incredibly grim.
In November 2015, Jawbone laid off 15% of its workforce, entirely shutting down its New York office. Throughout 2016, customer service went completely dark.
Users with broken UP bands were tweeting into the void, asking if the company was still alive, receiving absolutely no response.
The companion app stopped receiving critical software updates, rendering the hardware increasingly glitchy as iOS and Android updated around them.
Finally, on June 19, 2017, the company officially died. But they didn't file for a standard Chapter 11 bankruptcy restructuring. They entered liquidation proceedings via an assignment for the benefit of creditors, or an ABC managed by Sherwood Partners.
How does an ABC differ from a standard Chapter 11 bankruptcy?
Well, a Chapter 11 bankruptcy is a court-supervised process designed to restructure debt and allow the company to emerge and continue operating. An ABC is a far more absolute state-level process.
So it's final.
The company literally assigns all of its remaining assets, patents, office chairs, server hardware, IP, to an independent third-party fiduciary. That fiduciary's sole job is to liquidate everything as quickly as possible to pay off secured creditors. There is no restructuring. The company ceases to exist.
Upon that liquidation, Jawbone became the second-largest VC-backed failure in U.S. history, trailing only the solar panel company Solyndra. Almost $1 billion of investor capital evaporated, but the immediate aftermath of that ABC proceeding is highly controversial.
Right as the consumer entity was liquidated, Hossein Rahman immediately launched a brand new corporate entity called Jawbone Health Hub. He abandoned the consumer wearables market entirely, pivoting this new company to focus strictly on clinical-grade B2B medical software and services.
And BlackRock, the private equity firm that held that massive $300 million debt, managed to secure an equity stake in this new debt-free entity.
Meanwhile, the original venture capital firms that fueled the early rise, the employees whose stock options became worthless paper, and the everyday consumers who spent hundreds of dollars on UP bands and jam boxes were left with absolutely nothing.
As the original servers were permanently shut down, millions of consumer devices became non-functional plastic bricks.
The history of Jawbone provides a multi-million-dollar testament to a fundamental truth in technology. World-class industrial design, massive infusions of venture capital, and early market dominance cannot save an organization that fails to master the unforgiving physical realities of hardware engineering.
You cannot run a PR campaign to fix a fundamentally broken mechanical clasp.
And you cannot litigate your way out of short-circuited batteries. If your leadership lacks deep technical execution and instead treats physical manufacturing like software development, the market will crush you without hesitation.
And for you, the consumer listening to this, the fall of Jawbone illustrates the hidden systemic risks you take every time you buy into a closed, proprietary hardware ecosystem. When you purchase a modern smart device, you aren't just buying the physical object of molded plastic and silicon.
You are buying a fragile dependency on that specific company's server infrastructure, their API maintenance, and their ongoing financial solvency.
When a tech unicorn mismanages its burn rate and falls into liquidation, your expensive, beautifully designed device becomes completely useless overnight.
It is a sobering reality about the transient nature of modern consumer hardware.
It is, and it leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question that wasn't debated in the courtrooms but impacts every single user. When a massive consumer wearable company liquidates and hands all of its assets over to a third-party fiduciary to be sold off to the highest bidder, what exactly happens to the biometric data?
That is the ultimate unresolved tension of the quantified self movement.
We're talking about millions of hours of highly intimate biological data, minute-by-minute heart rates, deep sleep cycle analysis, physical movement patterns, dietary habits, and geographic location data. All of it was collected over years and stored on proprietary servers. If the hardware is dead, and the original corporate entity has been erased from existence, whose hands are holding your biological history today? When the servers go dark, does your data die, or does it just get sold to a new highest bidder? Something to think about the next time you strap a sensor to your wrist.